Hi, and welcome to the Magic Pages podcast, where we sit down with the people building, hosting, and publishing on Ghost. I'm Jannis, and today I'm here with André, the founder of PayGlue, a payment middleware that connects Ghost sites to Stripe alternatives. André, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here in your podcast.
André, can you quickly introduce yourself and tell people who you are and how you came to create PayGlue as a new tool for the Ghost ecosystem?
Yes, of course. I solved my own problem. I started 3 years ago with Ghost, and I dislike Stripe. Not because it's not working, only because I don't like Stripe very much. And so I looked for an option to resolve my problem and use another payment provider. And it wasn't really easy for me because there only were manual things to do around it with Zapier or Make or N8N. That works a little bit. And when there are some problems, then you have a lot to do and searching why it isn't working. And so I was looking for an problem solver, a sort of webhook middleware relay that helps me out. So I built my little product to solve my own problem. And as it was solved, I thought maybe another Ghost publisher needs this too.
Now that you've talked to a couple of people about PayGlue and you have a couple of paying customers already, what did you find apart from your own problem of disliking Stripe? What were some of their problems? Are there other problems with how Ghost and Stripe work together or don't work together in some cases where you say people would need an alternative to Stripe itself for Ghost memberships?
I found the problem is not Stripe itself. In some countries, you can't use Stripe. Your country is maybe not allowed in Stripe and you can't make an account. And so you can use Ghost, of course, with free membership tier. That solves not every problem for a publisher who wants to make some memberships with it. And so they change to other systems like WordPress or something else. And I found out in my country, in Germany, it's no problem with Stripe, and other countries don't like Stripe or you can use it. So I thought for myself, okay, when somebody needs to use Stripe, it should work with PayGlue, and when somebody don't have the option to use Stripe, it should work too, because when you don't use Stripe, you don't have the paid membership tiers, and every article is free. So how you compete this with a payment that somebody does and for exclusive articles? So the PayGlue problem at first was only to solving the payment and Ghost memberships problem. And now it solves a paywall too, so that users without Stripe connection can use a paywall to get exclusive content.
Cool. Can you tell us some of the countries where Stripe isn't available? Do you have any countries in mind?
I have a beta tester from Nigeria, and there was this problem first. And I have a beta tester from who's the country name? I don't get the name, but I have another country too that doesn't work well with Stripe. They were declined. They could make an account, but they were declined for Stripe. They said, oh, no, we don't want to work with you and process your payments. And that was not only the only problem. For example, when you are a solo founder, you make solo publishing and you have cool stuff that somebody wants to read and pay for, and you use Stripe, most people don't know the difference between a payment processor and a merchant of record. Yes, because Stripe only does like PayPal the payment and transactions, but you are responsible for tax remittance and everything else. And that don't come in first place, that comes later. For example, when the tax department sends you a letter and you have to strip it out, what was tax from this country and this country and this country. Everybody knows this from digital payments, for example, an ebook. Yeah, you take a provider like Gumroad, for example, and they remit the tax for you, no matter if somebody buys from the USA, from England, or from the EU. And because Stripe doesn't do that, and I have a beta tester that said, hey, for my own business purpose, I need a payment provider that works as a merchant of record too.
Mhm.
So I set it up.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why Magic Pages doesn't use Stripe for payments as well, because from the very beginning, that was my issue, that I knew I would not just have customers from, well, back then when I founded Magic Pages, we still lived in Germany, but now I live in Austria. And it was clear from the beginning for me that probably Magic Pages, if we scale, will be an international business where we have customers now literally from New Zealand to the US, Peru, and everything. And I don't want to handle Peruvian tax if it is in that case.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why we also with a merchant of record pedal in this case. And that's a super interesting use case, I think. Now that Ghost also has one-time payments or donations included, does PayGlue also work with those?
Yes, of course. The most problem is what Stripe one-time payment says. You make a sort of donation button, but now you don't need Stripe for that to create a link. You can do it in Ghost natively, and they call it donation, $5 and one link to pay. But maybe you start a new blog, yes, and you make a sort of founder membership. Pay what you want, yes, or one-time payment, and then the subscription comes later. It's very complicated to set up with Stripe. For example, when you take another payment provider like Lemon Squeezy or Cream or Pedal or Polar, you can set things like this up. And then no matter what somebody uses, one-time payment or pay what you want or subscription, you get access to your blog. Because I'm the first founding member. I pay $5 to support you, and I don't need a subscription. But the problem behind this is the technical problem that I have access to your exclusive articles as a founding member, and I'm not excluded because I have no subscription. And things like that you can't do with Stripe native. You can do it with Zapier, and you can duct tape it with N8N, of course, when you're happy with that.
That just opened a really interesting use case or thought that I had. I sometimes in the Magic Pages support chat get questions on how to use Ghost, whether I have tips on that, both from Magic Pages customers and non-Magic Pages customers. And one that comes up, I would say every 2 to 3 months, is a pay what you want subscription that they say, okay, my standard subscription is, I don't know, $10 a month, but I want to be able to offer people a pay what you want subscription. They can pay whatever they want, maybe as a one-time thing, maybe as a monthly thing. And my answer so far has always been, yeah, I'm sorry, not possible with Ghost. Is that something that PayGlue would enable people to do with Stripe in this case?
That is possible, not with Stripe exactly. It's not natively possible because Stripe is yeah native integrated directly in the Ghost ecosystem, as you know. But you can do it with another payment provider of your choice. And the most do pay what you want. But then it's a problem how to fix that in the background with Ghost, yes, to grant access for your new memberships. Or you have a special birthday, pay once and don't have a subscription, anything what you want. That is possible. And of course, it's possible when you already have Stripe in your blog and you use Stripe subscriptions and just want to add pay what you want or one-time payment without the donation, then you can use PayGlue in connection with your payment provider too. So you have more options to grant access. For example, when somebody pays $5 for pay what you want in Gumroad or any other payment provider as you choose.
Nice. And does it work both as one-time pay as you want and also as a subscription?
Also as a subscription. That works in two ways. That's no problem because PayGlue is a sort of relay, a sort of middleware. You connect inside of PayGlue your payment provider of choice and your blog. And the computer talk via the API that is encrypted and the webhook is signed. So for example, when I'm on your blog and you have a one-time payment and you, for example, choose Pedal because you have Pedal in your Magic Pages already, and I click buy, then I get access granted to your blog. And when you open your Ghost blog and see my name, my email address, you have some labels and a note what I have bought, when I have bought, what was the order number. And there are labels, for example, PayGlue active. So our paywall knows I'm an active user. Huh? And this works with Stripe when you already had Stripe set up or when you only have free membership tier. The only thing that I really needed to detail it out in the documentation was that you don't switch to paid member in the blog article. So you always leave it blank for free member and then just put our HTML snippet code inside it for the PayGlue paywall.
Essentially, you're replacing the Ghost paywall with the PayGlue paywall in this case then.
Exactly.
Very nice. That's an interesting model because I'm currently in touch with another customer who might actually be listening to this. And we've talked about this a couple of times now. And I'm wondering if you had some thoughts on this, whether that's possible with PayGlue and whether it would be easy for you to integrate that, because then I would need to integrate that. So maybe another use case for you. Have you thought about metered paywalls where customers say, okay, I want to grant membership XYZ 10 articles a month that they can read? Is this something that you have thought about before?
No, I
Okay.
didn't have such a question that is very special in my feedback or in my closed beta, or now we are on open beta, but I will take it with me. I know with, for example, Paddle or Polar, that is often used for SaaS businesses, you can do metered products. But of course, you need this metered product 10 articles to be measured inside the paywall and the blog. And this is, of course, a sort of special need. I can put it in our backlog, in our feedback. And when enough customers interested in this, of course, we can put development in it and test it out if it works. Because I have on all payment providers active accounts for testing and developing. And it's very special.
I will send that customer your way to get in touch with you, just so you can see whether your ideas on this match with his ideas, because he's very keen on launching something like this still this year. And I've said so far that could potentially be something that Magic Pages can offer, but obviously we're not payment experts and it is not something that I can jump on immediately. So potentially, if you're listening to this, even if we haven't been in touch about this before, get in touch with André and tell him that you want metered paywalls. So his list gets longer and longer on things to include.
Yes, and that is the very beautiful thing on the internet. Yes, you have somebody who has a special problem, and maybe we can solve it. But at first, we need to talk about it, and then we will see.
Yeah. I think the reason I mentioned it now is because of your explanation about the paywall, that you replace ghost paywalls with your paywall, because that is, from the research I've done so far, exactly what would be necessary for this. So you're already a couple of steps ahead there. So let's see what you two can come up with there.
The paywall was the mighty big frog in the whole development to get it right. And of course, we have a demo blog, blog.glue.io, and there you can test it yourself. Yes, I have connected this to our Sandbox account so that you have a Sandbox credit card and nothing pays directly from it. And you can test yourself if your access is granted or not granted. I think this is the best way for somebody who's technically interested to test if a system works and he would pay for it or not. And PayGlue is not a payment provider. Often people ask, hey, are you a payment provider? Do you see my transaction and my credit card settings and everything else? No, then you need to be a very certified and very security special company for this to do that. And we are just a relay. Of course, we need an email address and encrypted transaction that it's granted access for your ghost blog for new memberships, but we don't see credit cards, amounts, or anything else what's very important for the step.
Yeah, it's also something that you've talked about a few times now is that trust and that security. And if you remember when we first emailed about PayGlue, that was one of the points that I raised, that I personally am always a bit critical of adding an extra piece in a moving chain, because in my eyes, this is something that can break. It's another thing that can go wrong. And you had a really thoughtful answer to that. Can you quickly walk the listeners through how you earn that trust with PayGlue, or what your thoughts are on how transparent you want to be to show that the middleware that you've built is something that people can trust?
Of course. And I think the important thing is you don't have to trust me. And you don't have to trust my infrastructure that is hosted in the European Union. You can look in the code because PayGlue is open source. Of course, not the things like support system, like special needs in the dashboard, like sign up, but you can just go to our repo and fork it and test it yourself, local on your Mac, for example, or on your server directly. And you can look into the code and check it yourself, what we do and what we don't do. So, as you said, what we see and what we don't see. And I think that's the important part. You don't have to trust me or my architecture in this point. You can do it for yourself. But when you say, okay, I saw it, I like it, it worked for me, and I don't need a server for my own on this, I don't need this, or maybe my blog is already on Ghost Pro, or example on your Magic Pages services, then of course you can't do it with this, and therefore you can use then PayGlue, and you don't need any special codes, just HTML snippets to get it done. And as you said, for example, when somebody buys something and it doesn't work for an unknown reason, for example, we have, of course, in the backend, in the dashboard for you, there you can see what happens, where is access granted, or if there may be a maintenance problem with the webhook and you need to restart the webhook, something else. Because when a lot of machines talk together, sometimes the machine may be delay and you get an error, and then it's important that the customer don't buy new, you just click on retry webhook and access is granted. So it should be very easy for you as an end user and your blog.
On that note, if something fails in that whole chain between the payment processor, between PayGlue, between Ghost, and in that entire chain, if something does fail, and before we started the recording, you brought up a case where somebody bought something at 2 a.m. and then it failed. What happens in that case now? Would they see an error on their side, or would it just be a generic failure that they can't interpret?
That is exactly what I talked about in my setup before PayGlue. I had set up an N8N workflow on my own server, and because I grew out of Zapier and I grew out of Make and had my own server and wanted to play something and learn a lot, and their webhook failed on 2 a.m. A customer said, "Oh, I don't have access," and so I canceled my subscription. So I lost a happy paying member, and I don't get anything. Yeah, I didn't get anything. I forget to set up an SMTP in N8N to inform me when something doesn't happen. Because when everything works fine and smooth and every button is green, happy life. But when something doesn't work, you need to do something. And in PayGlue, of course, you get an information email to the customer, hey, something didn't work, please log in and review it. And then you see in the analytics tab exactly what process failed. For example, order payment failed. Okay, maybe the payment on the credit card failed. There you have a chargeback. You need to handle this directly with the payment provider, access granted or not. Or maybe the webhook had a problem because of a maintenance or of a delay. And then you can see it. You can see what's wrong and you can replay. You don't want to go to your customer and say it didn't work. You want to hit the replay and the customer get access granted, get an email from your Ghostbook. Hey, welcome to our blog. The automation behind it should work. And yeah, because I had the problem that I didn't get any information because I didn't set up any SMTP information in my N8N setup. Lesson learned for me, and I don't want that my PayGlue customers learn it the hard way and lose customers.
Been there, done that. I think every founder has to go through that at some point, that something is failing and you don't even know about it. That's happened a few times at Magic Pages as well.
Yeah, the silent fails are the fails that are very critical often. You don't see in everything, every check mark is green, but something doesn't work. So therefore, I have a couple of steps inside PayGlue to inform the customer. And if that doesn't work, he can always set up a support ticket and I help out, of course.
Perfect. Now, one question I also sometimes get with Magic Pages, now a little bit less often than a year ago, is the fact that I have been doing Magic Pages on my own. You're doing PayGlue on your own. What if you disappear tomorrow? Would that connection still work? Or would there be an actual issue for the Ghost publisher in that sense?
The nice thing on automations is when they are set up and they work after a test. So they work permanently. Or if somebody changes something on some end and you need to do a little bit of code rework to make it done because a payment provider changed an endpoint or something else, that might of course happen in the future, but the system will still running. And when it's failed, you get a notification what failed and you can rework it. But of course, not when a payment provider changes an endpoint that needs to be done in the code.
Yeah, I think that's something that is sometimes a bit underestimated in that sense, that even if you or me end up in a hospital for, I don't know, a surgery or something, the things will probably just keep running. Even though we are founder-led businesses, the systems, the computers are in most cases hundreds of kilometers away from us anyway. They don't need to be pet all the time. They don't need to have their good night story. They will, in most cases, just keep running. And when something fails, that's usually when you as an end customer notice it. I know that I've spent 3 weeks on the road in Scandinavia this year and have scaled down my involvement in Magic Pages a lot, and nobody noticed. And I bet it would be quite similar with most founder-led businesses.
Yes, and that's intended. It should work, and it should not only work when you stay on top on the server and pet it, and it should work as intended and work flawlessly, of course. And therefore, we're doing this, of course. Now, we don't have both time the whole life to sit in front of a Mac and watch the server what he's doing. Therefore, there are some alarm systems when something doesn't work in the background or some provider changes something. And as you said, you did a great job when you were 3 weeks on a vacation and refilled your own battery and charged it up,
Yeah.
and nobody noticed. Then your system flawlessly works.
Building it for 3 years. That's all the lessons I learned put into that, basically.
Yeah.
I remember having a vacation in Sri Lanka 2 years ago, which also had a time difference to, all the server infrastructure I had in Germany. And in that case, I actually had to get active. It was a case where the server couldn't reach the internet because the infrastructure provider had a massive network issue. It was not Hetzner, it was a smaller server provider that I'm not with for multiple reasons now. But that was one of the last points where I was sitting at, I think it was 2 a.m. in Sri Lanka in our hotel room on my laptop, trying to figure out what's going on there, trying somehow to call the emergency hardware support of that server provider from a Sri Lankan eSIM card, which didn't work. And that was for me the moment where I said, hey, this isn't sustainable. And since then, Magic Pages has improved a lot. And I think that every business has those stories. Similar to you, you had an issue at 2 a.m. where you didn't notice that something went wrong. You built something around it. And I think that's how lots of solo businesses develop and evolve over time.
You said reliability, and I give you an example. Cloud Code, $20 subscription, you can do a lot of nice shit, nice websites, a landing page, duct tape it together, and you have a sort of product. Yes. But my company lives in Germany, your company lives in Austria, and we have some laws. And for example, a simple subprocessor list, yeah, or a data processing agreement, yeah, to give it to your customers, yeah. I often see software, new SaaS products, micro SaaS, that look in the front very shiny and nice, and you log in and didn't see any support email address or a contact form or a terms or a legal or something else. Yes, Ghost publishing can be an own business with own credibility for your text, for your business, and everything else. And when you are controlled in Germany or in other EU, you need a data processing agreement with a scribble on it. Yes, so it's a PDF document, but it turned out I had 7 days, around a week, with special experts to make this document. Yes, nobody will see it. You only log in. You want this document, you can download it. But these are the little things. Or do you have a subprocessor list? Does somebody ask me? And I said, yes, I have a list here, but the list wasn't linked in the navigation. My problem, huh? And I solved the problem. The list was online and he could see. And a lot of this shit, yes, then you can see from the outside if somebody does it mean really good or just duct tape something in front what is shiny. So that there are little things that I'm looking for when I decide to work and to pay for a SaaS or not to pay for a SaaS.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting filter to have for any tool. And I know that the EU gets a lot of hate for GDPR and data privacy and cookie banners. I've learned from the guest in the last episode from Mark, who lives in Australia, that he barely sees any cookie banners because he lives in Australia and doesn't have the same regulation. And I know that the EU gets a lot of hate for implementing all of this, but it created a really interesting filter to see which businesses, which tools actually take it serious and say, okay, in some cases, or in some points, the GDPR might be overshot. But on the other hand, if you see that somebody takes care of it and has a data processing agreement, has a sub-processor list, has an actual data privacy policy that goes more than, hey, we collect data because we want to do it, then you actually know there's somebody behind that tool that cares, somebody that cares about the data of their customers, somebody that has thought about these things at least. Even if the outcome is, that it's a very relaxed data privacy policy, somebody has sat down and thought about it. And I think that's a very interesting filter you brought up, and how to filter out tools that you want to use in your business and not.
Yes, because I own a business as you, and I need a data processing agreement from another SaaS to work with it when I get controls of my company. And that also a little bit of filter, as you said. And the most people think, oh, I just put it in Cloud or in Chatty and I get the real text and everything is fine. But no, that didn't work. Of course, you can make a draft with it, no problem. But yeah, then you have to talk to experts, and experts want money. Yeah, you want money for your SaaS, I want money for my SaaS to make it sustainable. And that is the interesting part. A lot of people complained about why I don't have a free tier.
Why don't you have a free tier?
We don't have a free tier because I want to be sustainable and long in the business. And the problem with free tier is you get easy 1,000 users. But 1,000 users take a lot of resources from the server, from the database, and you have to pay it. Yes, and that is not sustainable when you are not a big company with hundreds of thousands of dollars on your bank account. Yes, I'm starting with this project and I want to be sustainable and on long-term run. And the people who understand it say, okay, right, I get it. Of course, they have 30 days free testing. You need, of course, to give it some time to test it out. Yes.
I think it hasn't happened to Magic Pages that somebody wanted a free tier, because we have the advantage that people know that hosting costs money, that there are a few free hosting providers out there. I know that 20 years ago or so, I've used free hosting providers in Germany, which always had very fun communities with them. But where we saw some resistance was also when we removed the starter tier on Magic Pages earlier this year, where we also said something similar. We said the starter tier was meant as a starter tier. It was not meant as I'm going to run my blog on the starter tier forever, because our assumption was it lets you start. And once you see some success, you will upgrade to the Pro plan, which has all the, let's say, the tools and less restrictions that you need as a ghost block that wants to sustain itself as well. And what we saw is that the starter tier grew and grew and grew, and people never moved off it. And that just became very unsustainable for us as well. Because on the flip side, people on the starter tier needed the most support, which we happily give. But there's also a point where you have to say, hey, if half of the support we have to give for the starter tier is just because of missing features that you would have on the pro tier, then that's a signal for us. That's a signal where we say, clearly the starter tier didn't work as we intended it, so we shut it down. Right now, Magic Pages is actually growing more than ever before, now that we removed the starter tier, and we see that people actually started upgrading from the starter tier to the pro tier. But it was a scary moment for us as well to just remove a tier. And I remember in February talking to Svatoslav, who just joined in February to work at Magic Pages, and saying, hey, I have no idea what's going to happen when we remove the starter tier, but I want to do this because I see that it's not sustainable for us. It turned out well, but as you said, we are running businesses, and I think we're happy to give support, both you and me. We're happy to support people and the goals that they have with our respective tools, but we're also not a charity where we can do that for free. So I definitely understand why you don't have a free tier, especially as something as critical as something that touches payments. Because if something goes wrong, I know that people on the free tier also want to have proper support and proper resolution to that. And you can only do that if you know that you get something back in exchange as well.
Exactly. And the pricing was the biggest issue. I normally thought, okay, I set a pricing table, what feels good, what feels wrong, what would I pay, and you make a sort of founding tier next to it. Easy peasy, I thought. And then with the closed beta, I get a lot of feedback. So to talk to your customers is a very important thing, not only with feature requests and bugs and what feels good, what feels right. I internally thought I have two prices. Yes, a sort of big agency price and a sort of studio pricing. Yeah, so you can have two publications and you have enough to do to work with the two prices. And then the most people said, yes, it's nice, but when I start with a blog, I only have one publication, maybe one payment provider in your list that I like to use. And I'm starting out and I want to get some money and I go outside and write and write. What do? They don't pay such amount of money for it. But the step to the pricing is too big to choose it because maybe they have no customer to pay their own bill. So I stepped back. I thought what may be possible. So I changed the pricing table again in front end because of customer feedback I already had. And now I have a sort of solo plan when we launch openly. Then when you have one publication, you can do it very well with one publication. Because I have more than one ghost blog, I need another tier on this. Maybe you are a sort of social agency and you have 10 ghost blogs to work with it. Yes. And that was the question too. What do I do when I have more ghost blogs? What do I do when I have a team? Somebody from the accountant, somebody from the technical, and somebody who only writes. So I didn't think about it. And so now we have some roles and members inside the dashboard who can handle your publications and your payment providers. I didn't thought about this before.
That's yeah, also something we're working on right now, because that's, as you said, you don't think about this before because you have one use case in mind when you develop your product, and that usually comes from your own experiences because we both solved our own problems. And as more and more people start using your product, you realize that the same problem or the same solution that you built can solve multiple problems. And all of a sudden you need to think about, well, okay, there might be a technical team member in a blog or in a publication that needs certain access. There is somebody that does accounting for them that might not even be in the same company. They might have hired, a separate accounting agency for that. How do you do that? Because in our case, we're using Ghost's own built-in billing portal, which only gives access to the entire billing stuff to the owner of the blog post. Do you then give the accountant that is not even part of your company ownership of your blogs? That doesn't make any sense. So as you say, you talk to your customers and you build this step by step to figure out a way that's smart for you. And that's also smart for them in a sense that they can use it the way they intended.
Yeah. Sustainability and on long term. And the problem wasn't to make an admin role, a technical role, an HR role. That's not the problem, or a booking role.
Yeah.
The problem are security. Can somebody from bookkeeping close your account? And when you change the account owner because your email address changed, how do we do this? And that are some little things. You think you do a little tweak, and then you have 3 days of coding sessions, testing, staging, and deployment. And then you say, okay, now you can change your role.
Yeah. There's a lot of work in the background that even as somebody that has built a product for 3.5 years now, I sometimes forget. And I think, oh, that's such a small change. And then I sit there for a week, and in the end, I'm just annoyed with everything because there's so many little things involved that you simply forget sometimes.
And you get feedback. For example, a few people ask, hey, we use Molly. We want to use Molly. Yes, you have Molly on your list. It's a new provider. Okay. I looked into Molly, and Molly is special for e-commerce. Yes. And it doesn't work quite well with webhooks and documentation. and what we want to do with this. And so I reconsidered it and said, sorry, actually, we only have one customer who wanted to use Molly. They now use another payment provider of their choice. But for one customer, 14 days of development, it doesn't work out in this system. When a few customers want to take Molly and use it, then we can work it out, of course. So the problem is not to say yes, the problem is to say to your feedback, what you get from the users or customers is to say no and why no, to understand it. Yes. And that works quite well.
All right, so you are not going to do Molly as a payment provider. Which payment providers do you actually support right now, apart from, I think you mentioned Stripe, Pedal right now, Lemon Squeezy?
We support Polar, PayPal, Pedal, Gumroad, Lemon Squeezy, and Kofi. Kofi is something from PayPal, I think. And we have Cream on it and Patreon. And we have on the list, for example, for German users, Digistore and Copecard. And of course, some special payment providers from the USA, but they are still with an asterisk for planning and looking into it. Actually, I'm focused on what works and what can be optimized. And when somebody says, hey, you have something on your list, when is it available? We have an open roadmap, we have an open changelog. We're happy to talk to people when they are interested. And often people ask, hey, Stripe. Yes, of course, we work with Stripe.
So also, if I use something like Kofi or Patreon, that means even though, let's say, those users, they didn't start the process on my Ghost blog. They might have come through, social media or whatever, saw a Patreon link somewhere, have a specific membership there. They would then be able to get access to your Ghost blog, and you basically say, here's an extra perk for that.
Exactly. Like in Patreon, you have, for example, Discord, yes, and you grant Discord access to a server with a role, and you do the same with your Ghost publication and access. And of course, Patreon is an own ecosystem. Yes, they want all your text, they want all your PDFs, all your creative work, and that doesn't quite fit with your blog that is externally. But often people use it, and I didn't know that before. I talked to my customer who had a Patreon, and I found out a lot of people use it as workaround because it works quite well, and they take the payments through Patreon and do the most stuff in their own blog. Okay, no problem with that. And when you buy in Patreon directly, you get access granted. And when you buy directly on a button on your blog, yes, you get access granted through Patreon. Because we have features, not only connection to the Ghost blog, maybe that I forget to tell. You can make a button or a pricing table. And for example, Kofi button or a pricing table with the 3 tiers from Patreon. And then you can choose which product to map it, because you need to map it. And what happens next? Do somebody get an, hey, you are welcome, or an opt-in email for your blog? You can choose what you like, and we recommend something. And the most interesting part was, in the first UI, you need to manual copy paste your Patreon product ID into PayGlue to make it happen. Of course, we reworked it now. With every payment provider, you have a sort of auto fetch product. When you make the connection, we can auto fetch the products, and you can map this membership tier directly to this product from your payment provider like Patreon or Kofi or anything else.
Yeah, interesting how it all comes together. André, it's been super lovely to talk to you about PayGlue, about your journey with developing it. You were kind enough to give a discount code for Magic Pages customers. That can be found in the customer portal. So if any Magic Pages customer wants to have a look at PayGlue and try that out, there is an exclusive deal section there where you can also have a little discount code for PayGlue. On that note, there's a question that I always ask everybody in the end. André, is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't? Anything we forgot to mention?
No, I think we could have a long podcast episode. And because we are stepping from topic to another topic, and normally long podcast forms are on the legal basis when you listen to legal podcasts, because the topics there are quite special. And I think our founding journeys that we talked about the problems and everything else, it was very nice. When there are some questions and people like to see me again to answer some questions, they maybe not send me in my email inbox, I'm happy to come back again, and we should talk about then these topics. At this time, I think we talked about everything.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, André, for spending some time with us. And as I said, if anybody out there has the need to have Ghost memberships with another payment provider, because maybe Stripe isn't available in your country, or you're just annoyed with Stripe for whatever reason, then have a look at payglue.io and see what Andre's been up to there.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here, and stay healthy.
Yes, stay healthy and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.